Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Set It Up podcast. I'm your host, Grant Chachere. I'm joined here by one of my good friends, Jace LeJeune of Gridiron Football. Jace, how you going, my man?
It's been going good, Grant. How about yourself? How you doing?
I've been doing pretty good. Just really busy, really tired, and can't
Oh,
wait for spring football to end
no,
with
you
this new
and me
game.
both.
Yeah. So, Jace, can you tell us like what you do at Gridiron Football for people who may not be familiar with you guys?
Right. A little bit of everything. We got a lot of stuff going on. But my title is obviously I'm an LSU beat writer for Gridiron Football. I cover LSU, but that's not my only title with Gridiron Football. I cover a lot of high school football, mostly in Louisiana, but every now and then I go and cover some players of some teams from other states. But mostly in Louisiana, I try to write about. I mean, obviously, I like to cover the 4 and 5 stars, and that's what everybody wants to talk about. But we also like to talk about some players and write about players that maybe don't get the same love and some same press as some of the 4 and 5 stars. Some guys that are flying on the radar. We have to call them diamond in the roughs. But yeah, myself and then we got a lot of writers. I write a lot of players from across the country that maybe don't have the LSU's and Alabama offers out there. We try to get them some spotlight as well. But yeah, it's all football all the time. We cover a whole lot of football. We put on events too. We put on our elite camps that we do right now. Everything kind of accumulates at the end of the season where we have our Gridiron Football Bowl game at the end of the year. And that's when some of the top seniors, maybe not the four, like I said, 4 or 5 star guys, but a lot of guys that are going to be college players, and they come from all over the country to play one last high school game and get one last shot to impress college coaches. So that's a pretty cool event. That kind of all goes down to that event, and we try to prepare for that. But we write about kids, we cover kids, we host exposure camps as well. But you can find all of our information on our website. You can find on gridironfootballusa.com. So that's where you can find us.
Mm. And just for I got to let you guys know how I know Jace. I used to be at Louisiana Football Magazine, and he was the guy like as an intern, and he was actually the guy who was outgoing. So I basically replaced him,
Yeah.
and then I actually ended up working with Jace
Uh-huh.
at Gridiron Football as an intern, where I did do a lot of Diamond the Routes. I actually also invited some guys to the All American game.
Right.
That was pretty big. We had it actually had in Baton Rouge last year, but one
Mm-hmm.
of the Diamond in the Rust I actually had was Bernard Causey, and that was right after he got the offer from LSU.
Right. Right.
Time to come into Ole Miss,
Yeah.
and then he just got the offer from LSU, and then literally a week later he decommitted from Ole Miss and commits to LSU.
Um, yeah.
So that's kind of what we do. And then I mean, obviously he's probably an exception. I mean, he was a guy that was obviously a pretty good player in high school, but he didn't really have a whole lot of Power 5 offers besides like Ole Miss and a couple others, and then LSU came taking it. But I remember also writing a story about a guy by the name of Reese Turner who was a receiver. Like he was an athlete, but he's probably more of a receiver from Assumption High School. And at the time, he didn't really get any offers. And by the end of the year, he got an offer from Nicholls State.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's guys like that, as you mentioned. We had this past year. I mean, Ja'Cory Norris is a guy that played at Tioga. We covered a whole lot about, and he signed with the Raging Cajuns. And we had Mackenzie Ardoin, who played defensive end at Northwest High School, and then Braden George. He signed. They both those two guys, Braden George from Episcopal, they both signed with Navy. So those are the type of kids we try to promote. I mean, maybe they don't always get the pub as other guys, but we try to get them as much love and support as we can, and because they've earned it. And we always try to look at guys. Like not only your play on the field dictates if you should play in the game or not, but it's your GPA. Your coach has to recommend us as well if they're that type of student athlete as well. Their talent definitely plays a part in them playing in it. But they have to be recommended by coaches, and we have a board of coaches too that invite kids. So it's all in good fun, and it's a really good opportunity. Whatever way, we're all about the kids. We're all about them getting exposure, and it all goes down to my boss Andy Bryson and his experience and what he's been through, and that's kind of like the mission statement is helping kids. So you can change one life, you can change community's life. So that's what we're all about here at Gridiron Football.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved the fact that you said Raging Cajuns instead of
Oh yeah,
the actual
we
school.
can't give them too much.
You all Lafayette, so you all Lafayette, ULO. Like we're just he's just trying not to get in trouble, but yeah,
Yeah, that's the most political way to saying it. So I might as well go with Raging Cajun and say you're gonna please everybody
yeah,
if you say that.
yeah, exactly. Right. So yeah, but one of the main reasons why we brought on, well, the whole reason why we brought on Jace is to talk about the spring football, spring LSU spring camp,
hmm
and that's been a huge talk. That's been a huge topic in Louisiana, or even you can make a case the whole Southeastern Conference LSU and just how they're going to rebound after losing Jane Daniels and two first-round receivers
Yeah.
in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. So it's a very interesting time at LSU. Obviously, they brought in a whole new staff, essentially. And I think really the talk of the spring camp really has been the defense. Blake Baker comes in. He actually is very familiar with Louisiana. The last time he was actually in the state, he was the linebackers coach at LSU. He actually played for my dad at Tulane as a linebacker. He also was the defense coordinator at La Tech for a few years, where he's actually on the staff with Joe Sloan.
Right.
But what have you seen? Well, Rob, we're both there, but what have you seen? What have you seen so far from your own observations of how Blake Baker's run this defense?
I like how he's been able to do it because you could tell he's a young coach, kind of that player coach mindset. Like he's wearing cleats. He's wearing cleats at practice. He's showing them how to do the drills and show them how to do everything. So to me, that tells me a couple of different things. The best teachers out there are the ones that teach you how to do multiple stuff during multiple ways because players learn different. Some of them they have to see it. They're visual learners. Some of them you have to tell them how to do it, and they get it. They're auditory. But that's what I like about Blake Baker is he's really hands on, and really like the whole defensive staff in general. What you and me have really seen, because I can hear Bo Davis from across the whole room yelling at his players, and I think the players they just give him a lot of energy. Corey Raymond's been pretty hands on with his guys, and has been showing a lot of instructions to them. So Jake Olson as well working with the safety. So I like how the whole defensive coaching staff has really worked with these guys, been hands on with them. I even asked Brian Kelly about what his impressions were today about the defensive staff, and he said that he just likes the energy that the players are really putting into it, playing for those guys and practicing for those guys. And in the end, that's all you really want is those guys to buy in to what those coaches are trying to teach them. And from what we've seen, it looks like those players are starting to buy into what those coaches are telling them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's been one of the biggest observations I had of the defense was just the energy. Because usually, the players have energy. Of course, they're the players. They're gonna have energy when they're on the practice field. They're gonna see some fish thrown because they're getting tired of beat and stuff like that, which is typical of spring and fall camp.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just the energy level is just a lot different. And a lot of that could be because there's new voices in the staff room. But then there's also the fact that these coaches have a different style in terms of like coaching these guys. So like, have you kind of noticed in years past of you covering LSU, just how, the energy levels? I think that's been a big thing I've noticed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's the biggest thing I've seen. And another thing I really like is this defensive staff, it's new, but it's familiar. All these guys know what it takes to coach in Louisiana, to recruit in Louisiana. And Blake Baker, as you mentioned, Blake Baker has worked with every one of those guys at some point in time on this defensive staff, whether it's at LSU, whether it's at Missouri as well. So I really like how Blake Baker has really worked with these guys, and we've seen a lot of improvements. And I feel like from what we've able to see just from the DB room, I feel like the defensive secondary, that's been obviously one of the biggest weak links last year, but really in spring, they've been actually been one of the more consistent pieces we've been able to see, which is a 360-degree difference. But the energy level has been one thing that we've been able to see every time we're in practice. Everybody's moving around. Nobody is just kind of lollygagging. Everybody is just focused in, and you want a staff that wants to be here, wants to coach here, and this whole defensive staff. I mean, they really care. Not only they really care, but I mean, all these coaches. I mean, Bo Davis, Corey Raymond, Blake Baker. All these guys have high reputations as well, and that's what you really need. So, especially when you're trying to rebuild back a defense that really pride themselves. This has been a defensive program. I know the last couple of years we talk about Burrow, we talk about Jaden Daniels, but for the longest time, this is a team that's prides itself on defense, on being physical and playing fast.
I think going back to the defensive backfield, I think that's really been probably the most inconsistent part of LSU's defense, really, because really since 2019, it's been kind of back. Even 2019, the defensive backfield struggled. 2020 was very notorious. Obviously, the 634 passing yard game where they allowed an SEC record 634 passing yards against KJ Costello from Mississippi State, who was benched the next week. If you don't remember, against Arkansas. But then 2021, they couldn't guard crossing routes. 2022 was an improvement, but there were times where they looked shaky. And then last year, that was bad. But yeah, I mean, but I think what I've noticed about this defensive backfield is that obviously the energy levels too, but it just seems like they're more attentive. They seem to buy in. There's also trash talking, which we really did not see in the last few years. It's almost like the good old days where LSU defense was talking mad trash and then backing it up. And we've seen that all throughout camp, not only with JV and Toviano, Major Burns has been playing well. Jardine Gilbert, who came in from A&M, has been playing well. But you also seen it from a freshman like PJ Woodland, who's taking first-team reps. He literally a few months ago was taking his final exams. Now he might be in talks to become a starting DB by the time the season kicks off against USC. But then also Deshaun McBride, he's been playing really well. And even though he's part of the second team, he's going to be a guy who's going to make an impact on this team this year as it looks right now. So what have you been impressed with the most from the defensive backfield?
I've been impressed because you just said, Grant, a lot of these guys are really young. I mean, you just mentioned it. Like, you got a lot of young – I mean, the talent is there. You got talented guys. It's just about which cornerbacks are going to really step up. And, I mean, look at the safeties. I mean, Deshaun McBride's a guy I've been raving about too. I mean, I've been really impressed with Deshaun and just the length and the ball skills. And he's just got that swagger too, that quiet, kind of confident swagger he's got. But that's definitely a name to watch out for. I like where they're lining up Major Burns too. And there was at one point last year in the fall, he was working out with the linebackers, and we just never really saw that. Like becoming more on the ball and more towards the line of scrimmage and playing that star role. And I think that fits him really well. So you have him down in the box and have guys like Jordan Gilbert, Sage Ryan back and playing center field. That's what you really want. That's a good combination to have. And you have young guys that played a lot of football. I mean, Zy Alexander hasn't gone through the spring, but at one point last year, I know it was a struggle in secondary. Zy Alexander was pretty much your best cornerback you had before you got hurt. So, I mean, J.K. Johnson's I thought he's looked pretty good coming off the injury. And you got a lot of young guys, Javian Toviano, Ashton Stamps. Ashton Stamps was kind of like the P.J. Woodland version of the fall, like a freshman that nobody was really talking about. And then all of a sudden we see Ashton Stamps get first-team reps. So you got talent there. It's just about what guys are going to really stand out. And that's going to be definitely something that we'll be watching and looking at in the spring game.
Yeah, I mean, I think going off of what you said, Ashton Stamps. Ashton Stamps was another guy who was like a PJ Woodland, who was a 3-star cornerback, and a lot of people thought now he was a pretty good player in high school. I mean, we both watched him at Bishop Brummel right outside the New Orleans area, but we didn't know how soon he was going to contribute to this team. And right off the bat, it seemed like he was probably the second best cornerback, which also just showed you how bad the defensive backfield was, that he was showing up more than some of the veteran guys like a Denver Harris and a Deuce Chestnut, who was also ACC cornerback at Syracuse. But also that's kudos to him because it just shows how much of a competitor he is. And that's something that Blake Baker's mentioned about PJ Woodland was how much of a competitor he is. I actually asked him about PJ Woodland. He
that was
mentioned
the first word he said when you asked him. It was the first word he said, competitiveness. That was the first thing that came to his mind when you asked him about
it. And so that's something you need if obviously LSU's defensive backfield. You're known as DBU. They're a bunch of competitors out there, and they're not afraid to step in right away as an 18-year-old kid to go out and knock some heads off of some of the best receivers in the SEC. So, I mean, I think that's a good thing to hear from some of the young DBs is that they're very competitive, and you just don't know when they have to step in and battle. But another big topic of the defense has been the defensive line, of course. Right now, it's not that the defensive line is bad, right? I don't think anybody is saying that because they've looked great throughout the spring. They're coached by Bo Davis, who's one of the best defensive line coaches, regardless of the level. I mean, he was at college and the professional level because he also coached at the professional level. Right. So he knows what it looks like to be a professional defensive lineman. But I think because you lack of depth, you're going to have to go on the transfer portal. And actually, Brian Kelly, when he was asked about it, you were there.
Yeah.
I did see this, is that the only position he's looking for in the transfer portal is defensive lineman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is pretty on point because I've heard there's going to be a lot of defensive linemen actually be in the portal. Right. Even Josh Pate, he even mentioned that there's going to be a huge market for defensive linemen, and you're going to see a lot of money being spent. So, how's the defensive line from your observations? Yeah. What has impressed you the most about the defensive line, and who has really surprised you, in your opinion?
I would say Kimo Makanole. I'm going to be honest with you because, I mean, that's not easy. He's like, hey, you got to switch from O-line to D-line and because we need you, right? And Makanole was actually getting first-team reps, right, with inside defensive line. So, I mean, I know the depth's not there. I mean, you're very thin right now. I mean, you only have Jacoby Ngori, Jalen Lee, Sean Washington, and Demarion Johnson and him. You only got 4 or 5 bodies to really work with in the first place. But I've been impressed with him, just his ability just to be an unselfish guy. Like, hey, if y'all need me on defensive line, I'll be there on defensive line. So being that unselfish guy for LSU, and I think he's going to play more because of it, because of being unselfish and moving to the defensive side of the football. And I really like the ends. I mean, I know LSU suffered a bad loss and losing Jackson Howard to the portal, but you got talent. I mean, you got talent, you got depth there on the outside. I mean, Brandon Swinson, I mean, Deshaun Lomax, kind of like the pair that a lot of people have been eyeing on. But you have a veteran guy in Savion Jones, and like Savion, I feel like Savion and Paris Shan can play inside or outside, or whatever you need them. So you got guys there on the outside. It's just you just gotta get a couple more experienced bodies in there on the inside, and I think you got something to work with right there. And then the biggest thing is having a defensive line coach, and that's not something LSU really had the last couple of years. And not only they got one of the best in the entire country in Bo Davis. So getting him was probably as big of a hire that Brian Kelly's probably ever had since he's been here.
Yeah, I mean LSU's been trying to get Bo Davis for a while now, and that's going back to Les Miles and Coach O. They've been trying to get Bo Davis for a while. This has never been able to land him, but now under Brian Kelly, I think it's also the stability factor of it. I think that's why LSU really hasn't been able to get a guy like Bo Davis who played at LSU. Matter of fact, he's an alum. So, I think just the stability that Brian Kelly brings, the pedigree that Brian Kelly brings, the resume. I mean, Brian Kelly is probably a top 5 coach in college football right now. I know a lot of people look at this like, well, he's not a top 5 coach, but if you look at the resume, he's the winningest active head coach in college football right now. Yeah. I mean, I think he's had 6 or 7 straight 10-win seasons. I mean, that's more. I mean, I think that's more than any other coach right now. Besides Kirby. So I mean, I think he and Kirby have the same in terms of the streak. I think they're this is like 6 or 7 straight 10-win seasons. So I think just the stability and the pedigree and the resume that Brian Kelly brings allows you to get guys like Bo Davis. And I also mentioned to you during the season when we were kind of debating about whether or not LSU should fire Matt House, and those are conversations that I don't like getting into, or neither you do, because obviously we're the sons of coaches. But that was the debate. What like if LSU was going to pull the trigger, who was going to get the job?
Right.
And I said that you can really get anybody because LSU is willing to spend the money, but also you have a guy like Brian Kelly who brings the stability. And actually, one of the first people I brought up in terms of like being realistic about the situation was Blake Baker. And it didn't take long after the news that LSU fired Matt House that they brought in Blake Baker. But I think also we have to talk about the defense. Is just the familiarity. Of course, the defensive staff, all those guys have coached together, right?
Right.
Blake Baker obviously spent time with Corey Raymond in 2021 when they were both part of the defensive staff. And then also, all three of the guys that LSU brought in on the defensive staff all came from Missouri with Blake Baker.
Right.
So there is a chemistry there, which I think is very important because the last defensive staff really didn't have that chemistry, but now these guys do. And I think that's another factor that comes in. What do you have to think about? What do you have to say about the chemistry between the staff?
Yeah, and Brian Kelly, and I asked him about it, and Brian Kelly said the same thing. It's like it's not like we just randomly plucked coaches out of thin air and say, hey, come join us and coach the staff, be a part of the staff. But there was a reason behind all that. And I said earlier, like at some point, Blake Baker's had a coaching relationship with all of his defensive coaches, whether it was at LSU or whether it was at Missouri. And I think that helped. I know that there are probably a lot of serious conversations going back at it now, knowing what we know now, probably back in the Missouri game when LSU was playing Missouri and seeing the success that he really brought to Missouri and just the aggressive set of defense he really brought. Because if you remember back at Louisiana Tech, Jalen Ferguson was the all-time leading sack leader at Louisiana Tech, and Blake Baker had a big part in that.
All-American.
Yeah, All-American. Yep, all-time leading sack leader. So you have more of aggressive defense, and that's what we were saying all the time last year is like, hey, I mean, you know what you got in the back end. You know your offense is going to score at will. Hey, be aggressive. I mean, you won't give up a 70-yard touchdown anyway. Might as well be aggressive. You might force a negative play, a fumble, a sack, interception, something like that. So it's good to get a guy that's really aggressive, has that aggressive mentality, and it's his success with the linebackers too, like with Damone Clark, for example, and what he did in 2021 in his last year at LSU, and now having the opportunity to coach arguably the most talented, versatile, probably the best player on the football team and true football player, Harold Perkins, and having that toy to work with. So that's going to be really fun. And obviously they're going to still experiment with him playing more inside linebacker, but I think it's going to be more of like scheming him up to where he can get some free rush lanes and be aggressive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we bring up the linebackers, I'm glad you brought up Damone Clark because that kind of feeds into my next question. A lot of the talk in this presser was about Harold Perkins, of course, about him moving in inside linebacker and how they're going to use him in inside linebacker. And then as he's talking about that, the fire alarm goes off, which was hysterical. Like everyone's looking around, like, yeah, of course, when we bring up Harold Perkins, the fire alarm goes off. It's like
behind the scenes is doing their job.
Yeah. Well, apparently it was something with the kitchen. Actually, that was actually like no, that would have been funny if it was. That would have been clever, but no, it was something. I think something was going on in the kitchen actually, because the football operations building where you have the presser, like where you have the locker room, the weight room, there's no practice facility, but right next to the press conference is the kitchen area, which is like where all the athletes eat and everything. Right. So that's where that came from, actually. But kind of moving with Harold Perkins, we'll get to him in a second. The reason why I'm glad you brought up Damone Clark was because I think there's a lot of correlations between him and Greg Penn. I think Greg actually is in a much better situation in his career than Damone Clark was. But Greg Penn is somebody that has been steadily improving year in and year out, and I think he's actually one of the more underrated linebackers. And not only just the conference, but the country, really. And I actually asked Coach Baker about that and about Greg Penn's relationship and how he's improved and stuff like that. And he's very high on Greg. What do you expect out of Greg Penn going into this year?
I expect kind of like a season, like you said. I mean, like with Damone Clark, and the thing about Damone Clark, like you mentioned, like there was a lot of heat on Damone Clark the year before. because I mean he got a lot of hate, but a lot of it was really undeserved. But really, Greg Penn, he's like you said. I mean, ever since I've been here, I mean, I thought he's always been solid. I thought he's always been a really good player, and you could tell that his leadership, just being around him for media availability, like just his vocal leadership and how much that has improved over the course of the year. I mean, he's already one of the SWAT members of the defense during the offseason. So yeah, I mean, he's going to be a big piece to what he this defense does, because he's a guy that could tell Harold Perkins, say like, "Hey, I was on the staff when I was a freshman back in 2021 when he was doing that stuff with Damone Clark. So just listen, that'd be another voice on towards Baker's corner for Harold Perkins. Like, hey, listen to this guy. He knows what he's doing, and he's going to put you in the right success to succeed. And yeah, I mean, I do agree with you that he is definitely one of the most underrated players, and actually made towards the course of last year, towards the end, he made some big plays at the end of the season. And made some plays against Texas A&M that really got them the win, secured the win at the end. And he's made, I mean, in a struggling defense, he's been one of the biggest bright spots last year, in my opinion.
All right, going to now let's move on to Harold Perkins. I just want to talk about Greg Penn first to show some love.
Oh yeah.
But Harold Perkins will remain as an inside backer. Obviously, his freshman year, where he made his name being known across the country. But he actually played more of an outside backer, where he came off the edge a lot. But last year, he was moved to the inside backer, and a lot of people criticize that move, of course, because you're taking him away from the edge. He's one of those guys where he's a difference maker. So people were like, "Why are you taking him away from the spot that helps us win games?" And really, last year that kind of showed where there's times, especially against Florida State, where a lot of times he just phased out the defensive game plan because he was as an inside backer. But now you still be at inside backer, but I think he'd be much better utilized under Blake Baker. Like you said, was huge in Damone Clark's 1 year transformation into becoming just a role player to becoming the most, not the most, but the best defensive player on the team. I mean, by far. I mean, he was a difference maker. I mean, Damone Clark won LSU a lot of games during 2021 where they had no business winning, including the A&M, where he had that last hurrah at Tiger Stadium where he just went off.
Uh-huh.
But what do you like? What do you like about Blake Baker keeping that inside backer, and what do you hope to get out of Harold Perkins, especially since you're moving to a spot where a lot of people kind of criticize the move of keeping him on the inside?
Yeah, I know that they're trying to work with him that way, and we got a chance to talk to Harold, about four of us, really, the last media availability, and he hasn't really got a chance to talk to me that much about really much. But talking to Harold, you can tell that he's just a football player. I mean, every time his response was, "I'm an athlete. I'm a football player. Wherever you want me to put me, I'll be there. I'll succeed there." And whether it's at because he hasn't played inside, yeah, keep in mind too, he hasn't played inside linebacker in high school. So this is definitely something that he's trying to adjust to. And really, I thought the first game of the year they had him thinking way too much, trying to do with coverage responsibilities, and it's when you got a great athlete like that, you can't let him just think too much. Just let him see ball, get ball, right? And that's what made him a lot successful his freshman year. But moving ahead, I think he's more of an experienced player. And I think just another year of learning the ins and outs of being an inside linebacker. But at the same time, Blake Baker's had success wherever he's been with, whether it's linebackers or a pass rush specialist like Jalen Ferguson, like I mentioned earlier. He's had success. So he's going to try to use some of those advantages, even though it might come at inside linebacker. Another time it might put him on the outside. So maybe majority of the time he hasn't played on inside linebacker, but he's going to try to put him in the best position as possible so he can show off some of those skills and some of those talents. Like we saw his freshman year and just really attacking the quarterback and making plays in the backfield. And I think finding a way to scheme him up where he can go off the edge, in the inside. He can come up in different ways. That way, he doesn't have to be one-dimensional at the same time. So he doesn't have to be one-dimensional coming off the edge. He can be versatile and like puts him in the middle, off the edge, at the star position if you put him there. There's many different ways you can experiment with a player like that, and I have a good feeling. And you just hearing him speak, right? He's a confident coach. You can tell he's got a lot of confidence, and he knows what he has in Harold Perkins, and you can kind of tell when we had a chance to talk with him.
Right, and the thing about Blake, Coach Baker, I don't want to keep calling him Blake. I mean, I don't know why I keep doing that, but Coach Baker, that's more formal. But Coach Baker, of course, his whole philosophy is, fast, being aggressive, and making the play. But also, the thing about his defense is he wants to keep it as simple as possible. So it's much easier for his players to understand. And then when that happens and when the players actually understand it, it makes it very complicated for the offense to stop what's coming at them. And, people keep saying, well, Harold Perkins can't play inside backer. Well, a lot of people said the same thing about Damone Clark when they moved him to inside backer when Coach Baker was a linebacker coach at LSU, of course. Yep. And then look how that turned out, right? So it's about teaching them and make sure they have the best not the schools, but like they're in the best areas where they can succeed. Because Harold Perkins will be playing inside backer when he gets to the pros. I mean, that's just real. Like he's 6'1", 230. Like that outside backers have to be like 6'4", 6'5", and 240 pounds. So if he has to move the inside. I know people are like, oh, well, why are you so focused on his pro career and not focused on winning games? They're trying to do both, right?
Yeah.
Obviously they're going to be blitzing him. Like, let's not keep that in mind. He's so aggressive and so he's so athletic and so aggressive that it would be you'll be crazy not to blitz him, right? And so I think I really like the fact that Coach Baker's really been kind of straightforward with how they're going to use Harold. But yeah, moving on to we covered most of the defense now, but let's go on to the offense. I also want to mention this too, like before we get in the offense, that all the coaches, and I've mentioned this before on this podcast a bunch of times, and I know I keep killing them. What's the word I'm looking for? What's the statement where you're like you keep saying too much of something that gets annoying?
Yeah, keep being the bush about something, maybe.
Yeah, keep being the dead horse. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And so, like, I keep being the dead horse, but all the coaches on the staff, whether it's offensive or defenses, they're either from Louisiana, they either played football in the state of Louisiana and even at LSU, or they have some sort of tie to Louisiana, whereas if they're just coached here, like a Slade Nate. Well, Slade's from Tulane, from Louisiana, but Kevin Peoples also coached at Tulane back in the mid 2010s, so he's familiar with New Orleans. And same thing with what's the safeties coach's name again?
Jake Olson.
Jake Olson. Yeah, he also coached in Louisiana for a time too. I believe it was actually at Tulane. But all these guys are familiar with Louisiana, and that's very important. Considering the fact, if you look at the next 2 or 3 recruiting classes, what Louisiana is developing in terms of talent is insane, especially the class of 2026, which has 3 of the top 10 prospects in the country. So and 2 of them are in Baton Rouge. So just think about that. And also the number 1 overall prospect, and Jakeem Stewart and St. Aug High School in New Orleans, the alma mater of Leonard Fournette and Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger. So that's why Brian Kelly, even though he didn't pick random guys, it was very strategic in how he wanted to do it. He wanted to pick Louisiana guys who are familiar with the state, who could identify with the players, but more importantly, recruiting. And you need to nail these Louisiana guys because you don't want people coming in and taking them. And you saw that with Texas most recently with Sarkisian coming in, and then also in the past with Saban. Now Saban's retired. Now you really have to worry about Sarkisian. Maybe DeBoer can pull it off too, but who knows? But I want to talk about that before we get into the offense. But going to the offense.
Uh-huh.
I would say it's kind of a new era, I guess. Not really, because
Yeah.
all of your your whole offensive line returns, both your running backs return. However, it's a new quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Gary Nussmeyer's not the starting quarterback. It's been kind of weird. LSU's had a weird history with quarterbacks because from 2008 to about, I'll say 2017,
Uh,
you only had one pretty good quarterback. It was
yeah.
Zach Benedict. Other than that, you either had average quarterbacks or really bad quarterbacks. And
Yeah.
it was famously Jordan Jefferson. I think that's kind of the meme when you bring up bad quarterbacks. Matter of fact, Jaden Daniels got comparisons to Jordan Jefferson for some weird reason, but we're not going to get into that because that's in the past. He won the Heisman. You got it. But anyway, LSU kind of has had a tough time trying to keep consistency at the quarterback room, because even after Burrow, there was 2 or 3 different quarterbacks that got starts. Miles Brennan, Max Johnson, and even Garrett Nussbaum got I would say half a start because that was against Arkansas.
They got DJ Finley thrown in that mix too.
DJ Finley, that's right. That's right. He had 4.
Yeah,
he had 4. So, and really, he finally got Jay Daniels to come in, and even though he kind of struggled early on, this past season, he turned into arguably the best quarterback in the country and won the Heisman. So, with Garrett Nussmeier coming in, what are your expectations looking at him, not only for what are you looking for in the spring game in terms of Nussmeier, but then also what the future holds for Nussmeier as we go into fall camp?
I mean, as far as the spring goes, I mean, I hope we only see him like 1 or 2 drives and he gets it. You know, like he works 1 or 2 drives of the offense and he's in perfect. He's really in sync with the offensive guys. That's what you really want to see with Kyron Lacey, with Chris Hilton, with Mason Taylor, some of those weapons. You want him to be in sync. You want him to be in rhythm. So if he looks sharp, it looks like he's in command of the offense because that's what we saw from Jane Daniels in the spring game. If you recall back in the last year's spring game, Jane looked like a totally different quarterback. Like he was in command. And you want Garrett Nussmeier to show that and just like emphasize, even though it's his job, you want to emphasize that I am the guy. That I am the guy to replace Jane Daniels and just keep just calm Tiger fans. Even though we've seen Garrett Nussmeier in action and he's looked good. I mean, we've seen him in the bowl game getting the start. And he looked good. He threw for close to 400 yards, 3 touchdowns, putting the game-winning drive against Wisconsin. And then he looked good against the national champion Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship when he had to come in for Jay Daniels. So you hope that he looks good and it looks like the Garrett Nussmeier that everybody's really expecting to be because you really want that spring game to be more of – we want to see more of Ricky Collins. We want to see more of A.J. Swan because you really got to knock down – that insurance right behind Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback insurance, in case something were to happen to Nussmeier. Because you had that luxury last year with Jay Daniels. If something happened with Jay Daniels, you know who you got in Garrett Nussmeier. We're still trying to figure that out right now in this year's quarterback group. But I really like that Joe Sloan, even though it's a new role for him, from quarterback coach to OC, and he's still working with the quarterbacks, obviously. But really, he's been here since the beginning. With Brian Kelly. So have that symmetry, that communication, and that synergy, right, between both Nussmeier and Sloan. That's what you really want your OC quarterback relationship to be. And every day he works with Sloan during practice. And not to mention he's got some pretty good weapons at the chance to throw the football too. So I'm really confident in Garrett Nussmeier. Now, everybody's saying don't expect anything like you saw with Jaden Daniels last year or Joe Burrow's 2019 season. But remember the first years for both Burrow and Jaden Daniels were a little shaky, had some ups and downs. I think this could be more of a consistent basis to go off of in the first year potentially.
Right. And I remember when Jaden got all that criticism, people were like, oh, Jaden, he doesn't throw the ball down the field that much. He doesn't do this. He runs too much. And stuff like that, but people don't realize that Joe Burrow actually had a worse season than Jaden. So actually, Joe Burrow, there was 4 or 5 games where he threw either 50%, had a completion percentage of 50% or lower. So he really struggled at times in that year. Now even the Auburn game where that's famous with the Cole Tracy 50, I think it was a 50-yard kick. That game, I think he had like a 46% completion percentage or something crazy like that. So like he wasn't like the Joe Burrow we saw in 2019. I think that spoiled a lot. We've had this conversation before. I thought Joe Burrow's 2019 season kind of spoiled a lot of fans. So there was high expectations for Jane Daniels, but they're they're two completely different quarterbacks. At the time when Joe Burrow came in, even though he had some issues that he had to fix, when Jane Daniels first got to LSU's practice, Brian Kelly literally said he had to work on his feet.
Yeah.
Like, not even just not throwing mechanics, not being accurate, not doing this. No, he said his feet.
Uh-huh.
Which is crazy to think about. Nobody really focuses on footwork anymore, but that's something that, I'm saying that not they don't focus on footwork anymore, but like the thing is, footwork is something you already master by the time you get there. The fact that he played college football at Arizona State for 3 years and didn't have bad footwork was mind-boggling. So they had to fix everything with Jane Daniels, and then everything worked out, and he won the Heisman Trophy. And a lot of credit really went to Joe Sloan for his individual work with Jaden, and that was awesome to see kind of how he grew from kind of this guy who was basically thrown out of Arizona State.
Right.
He left on his own, but his former teammates were trashed his locker. It was like toxic environment. He had 3 different offense coordinators. Herb Edwards actually ended up getting fired early that season, in the 2022 season. So it was a very toxic environment. And he basically got thrown out of there. Until now, he might be the first. Well, he won't be. Caleb Williams will be the first quarterback taken, but he might be the first quarterback taken right after him. So that's pretty amazing to see how he grew. And I think with Garrett Nussmeier, it's going to be a little while, right? I think even though he played well in the bowl game against Wisconsin, it's a whole nother beast when you're the full-time starting quarterback. Yeah. When there's all the expectations on it. I think there wasn't as much pressure in the bowl game, but now going to next year, you're going to get USC, who's a brand in college football. LSU has not won the opening game since 2019, so there's that expectation. And also, you're replacing Jaden Daniels, right? Who's just the third Heisman Trophy winner for LSU in the school history. So there's a lot of expectations there, but I think he's going to have his kinks. He's a lot like Brett Favre, right? I'm not saying he is Brett Favre, but in terms of how he plays, he can be reckless, but he makes a throws like, oh, damn, what a throw. And there'll be some other players are like, what are you doing? But that's who he is, and I think that's something LSU fans have to get accustomed to the same way we had to get accustomed to Jane Daniels and the same way we had to get accustomed to Joe Burrow. So it's not going to be a quick, he's the greatest quarterback ever, right? And I think you'll have a better first season than Jaden and Joe.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right, but it's not going to be a bang, bang, bang. It's not. It's going to take a little while. And that's how it is for a lot of quarterbacks, Speaking of quarterbacks, we mentioned Ricky, we mentioned AJ Swan. What are you looking forward to in the spring game, seeing that quarterback battle? And who do you think has the edge going into the spring game?
I would say, really, I mean, that's the number one thing I'm looking for, to see which guy, I guess, is more consistent in just leading the offense and making the right decisions. I would say just because of his experience in the offense, I wouldn't be surprised if Ricky gets the second team snaps or the first quarterback that's out there, just because he's got another year in the system than AJ does. But I feel like it's going to be pretty even. And it's going to be even. I don't think as whoever performs better than the other, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference going into the fall. Now, somebody might get the upper hand based off the spring game, but it's not going to really make a difference. I think it's going to be really bowed all the way until fall camp, because I think these two guys are been playing that close. But I just want to see who's more in control of the offense, and kind of the same thing with Garrett Nussmeier, right? Who's more in control, who can make the right throws, right reads, gets the job done. Who's been more consistent doing that? So that's what I want to see. Who's more consistent? Because we've seen good plays by Ricky. We've seen him miss high. We've seen good plays by AJ, and we see him sail some throws. So who's going to be more consistent? I mean, that's what it's going to come down to. Do the little things right. So I'm intrigued by that quarterback battle, but I think it's going to come down to the very end. To be honest with you.
I think so too. I think a lot. I think Ricky's outperformed AJ Swan for a lot of practices this spring. But the thing about AJ Swan, he started a lot of games in the SEC from going to assignment from Vanderbilt, right? Even though you can say, well, it's Vanderbilt, right? I mean, you're not. I mean, it's Vanderbilt. Let's be honest. Unfortunately, but
experience, yeah.
But it's still the SEC, right? So
right.
you still saw Georgia, you saw Tennessee, you saw Florida, you see all these teams in the SEC. I think maybe you saw Alabama. I don't know how the SEC schedule works, but he's seen all the teams that most of the teams in the SEC, so he knows what it means to be in the SEC compared to a guy like Ricky Collins, who only played in 4 games in garbage time, so he can have his wretched year, of course, But I think the edge has to go to AJ Swan. However, I think even going in the fall, I think they might still put him in the back, even though Ricky performed better than him. However, Ricky could have an awesome spring game, and it would be hard not to say, well, Ricky, you're not the starting quarterback, especially if he outperforms AJ Swan by a good bit, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, moving on. Let's talk about the running backs. I know. Like the defensive line, they don't have much depth. They didn't have much depth going in. Of course, right now the only 2 scholarship running backs are Josh Williams, who is in his 20th year.
Yeah, right. Since the dawn of time.
and then you've had Caleb Jackson, who seems like he's the future star running back at LSU. Just the way he runs, and also all the vibes he gives off of, kind of from remembering watching Leonard Fournette run the ball at LSU in the in his gold helmets and gold pants and his white jersey trucking over Auburn.
Yeah,
I'll love going back to those highlights. If you're an LSU fan, I went there, graduated there 3 months ago, and that brings a lot of good vibes. However, coming in, it was kind of tough sledding. Logan Diggs transfers to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And he's allowed to play right away because he's a graduate transfer. The SEC, you can't transfer. The only time you can play right away in the SEC, going from an SEC school to another, is if you're a graduate transfer. And since he's a graduate transfer, he will have immediate eligibility to play for the Rebels. But then also Trey Hawley was also arrested at the beginning of the year,
right?
Because he was accused of attempted. He had a second degree of attempt. He had a second attempted murder charge of the second degree, and he had a couple other charges too. But the attempted murder charge was dropped.
Right.
And so it's an unfortunate thing you have to hear, but it's good news for LSU because it means that it's just closer and closer that he will be coming back. He's not coming back anytime soon because obviously spring games on Saturday. But but he has there's a huge possibility he'll come back for fall camp. So now you have 4 scholarship running backs, along with Caden Durham coming in next fall because he still hasn't graduated from high school yet. But also I really liked how Brian Kelly mentioned that he still was attending LSU. Now he's taking online classes, but they're able to work it out with the university and get it straight where he can still be educated at LSU, still take classes, make sure all of his credits are right and stuff like that, which is a good thing to hear. But going into the spring game, what do you expect from the running backs?
I mean, I know that Brian Kelly wants to display them, right? Because I think he's been trying to, he's trying to limit their production a little bit in the spring practice. You don't want too much tread on the tires because no matter what, I mean, as thin or as deep as they are, Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson look like they're going to be your 1 and 2 options, right? So you try to keep those guys healthy for the most part. I mean, you want to get them to see some good looks with the first team offense, maybe for a drive and to take them out. But that's what you kind of want to see. I mean, you want to see this offensive line, this running game work well together because I think that's going to be the biggest wild card and how successful Garrett Nussmeier is this year is the running game. Because a lot of the time the running game really 95% of it was just Jaden Daniels taking off and running, not by design, just because nobody was open, he had to run. But you're going to need to rely on your veteran offensive line and a guy like Josh Williams, who's a veteran 6-year guy, and Caleb Jackson, who has all the potential of the world, showed a lot of flashes last year. And get Trey Holly back and everything settled with that. It gives you another really good option at Cam Durham, but we see plenty of highlights from him in high school and what he's done at Duncanville. He could definitely play. So it gives you 4 running backs right there. But you just want, at most, as far as any position goes, you want to make sure that Williams and Jackson are really good to go and they feel good after the spring game, because you want them as not as much touches, but at the same time you want them to get some work in.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because I was actually about to bring that up. I mean, the running game is going to be extremely integral for LSU to succeed next year, especially if they want to go far, go for the playoff. Now they expanded to, I mean, 12, 14 teams now? I don't know. They keep changing the numbers, so I don't know what the exact number is. I mean, but anyway, the playoff is expanded, of course, and if they want to get to the playoff and also go far in the playoffs and win the national title, they're going to need a strong running game. You saw that with 2019. One of the big, even though a big reason for that is having the number 1 overall pick in Joe Burrow and 2 of the top 5 receivers in the NFL right now. I mean, that's pretty easy, but that's pretty easy to win games. However, they had a solid running back in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who ran for over 1,400 yards and really that where it showed was against Alabama, where he ran for over 100 yards and also had a huge game out of the backfield receiving. And so having a run game, it will take you very far, especially against teams like Alabama, where historically, if you can't run the ball against Alabama, you're not going very far.
Right.
And that showed in 2019 that here's I always say this: if you run for over 150 yards against Alabama, your chances of beating them go up. And that's saying it goes with Georgia and so on. But having the run game is integral, and so I think it's really important that LSU handles that run game as the best they possibly can, because Garrett Nussmeier, he's athletic. Of course, I think he ran I forgot what the time he said, he ran like a miles per hour. He did I think he did a straight sprint and I forgot the miles per hour. I think it was 15 miles per hour. I'm not sure what it was, but he's not slow, but he's not Jane Daniels. He's not gonna break people's ankles and outrun the defense 80 yards down the field like you saw against Florida. So you're gonna need to have a run game, right? So it's very important that they stay healthy, because remember. Josh Williams has had injury problems in the past.
Yeah. Last year.
And even the last 2 years, he's dealing with injuries. And remember, the reason why he was a walk-on at LSU was because he tore his ACL in high school. And so really a lot of people backed off, and then LSU took him in as a walk-on because remember, his guy was a great, I'll say, running back in high school.
Right.
He was getting recruited by everybody. Let's take a chance because we don't have much depth in the running back room. And then he eventually became a really good player in 2022. But his whole thing has been battling injuries. Right. So you need to have your running back room as healthy as possible, because we're not sure what Trey Holloway's situation, even though it looks a lot better, we're not sure what his situation looks like. And Caleb Jackson, you don't want him to be a bell cow where he's his body's getting broken out every game. So and the Caden Durr's only a freshman, so you don't know how much you could contribute right away. So it's very important for that running back room to stay healthy. But the good thing is the best way to have a good running game is your offensive line. Yeah. And LSU has the best, in my opinion, the best offensive line in the country. Yeah. So we all know who the stars are. We know Will Campbell and Emory Jones are going to do their thing. Gary Dellinger's been there, done that. Miles Fletcher's returning for his third year as starting guard. So a very experienced offensive line. But DJ Chester, he's looked impressive all spring. And look, I think he's going to be a fantastic piece of this offensive line. But, what have you seen from him so far? And do you think that he could be an all SEC center? Let's just say, I know that's too far-fetched, but the way the coach is talking about him, the way Brad Davis is talking about him, it seems like he's the next big thing on this offensive line.
Yeah, I like him. I got a chance to talk to him too. He's a very mature young man, and they liked him when he came in as a freshman last year. Kelly was actually raving about him as a freshman during spring and during
Yep.
fall. So he was high on him since the very beginning. But it's really good that he's got some experience, right? He got into the Missouri game on the road, and that's a hard place. Besides quarterback, center's like probably the toughest position to play on the
Mhm.
road. So for him to handle that environment against like Missouri they're a pack. I mean they're ready for that
Oh yeah.
because it was a huge game. So for him to handle that environment says a lot, and also he can lean on the other ones. So like you have four other guys alongside you that have 3 years of starting experience. So they can lean on those guys. And it's good to have a guy like Garrett Dellinger, right, who's played center before, has come in and never played center before. That was a rough situation 2 years ago. He had to do it against Florida State, but he could lean on a guy like that. That's done it before and could lead on guys like Miles Frazier and Garrett Dellinger alongside him to help make those calls. And then obviously with Will and Emery. So I think DJ's ready for it. Just seeing him, I think he's uh, like really mature. The coaches have raved about him. And then I think I saw a tweet about his high school coach that said, talk about just a workman like mentality. He has it, never missed a practice, never missed a day of school. So that's the type of guy you really want, a disciplined guy at the center position. And I think sitting behind Charles Turner and learning under him will help him a lot there. So I think they're going to rally around DJ, and I think he's going to get comfortable as we get more into it.
Yeah, and the thing is, I remember like he played so good in the Mizzou game, like literally right after the season stopped, was over. Marlon Martinez transferred to Mississippi State.
Yeah,
Like that was the guy a lot of people thought was going to be the successor to Charles Turner.
right.
Just because they have similar builds and he's been there for a while, he knows the offense and knows the players and stuff like that. But DJ Chester came in, looked so impressive. We're like, okay, yeah, if Charles Turner goes out, this is the guy we're putting in. And
I think Marlon struggled in that Missouri game. I think they put Marlon in there, and they put DJ in for Marlon, and DJ settled in. So that should tell you everything that you need to know. If you can handle that situation as a freshman, I think you can handle pretty much anything.
That was remember that was for a lot of people to remember that game. That was a time when LSU's offense was really struggling against that Mizzou defense that was led by, ironically, Blake Baker. So who was the defense coordinator over there? So that was a pretty big moment for him, and that also ultimately led to LSU coming back and winning that game. And really, a lot of people criticize Jane Daniels for not having a Heisman game, even though he had a couple especially against Florida. But really, if that game was played at night, that probably would have been his Heisman game. I think it was ruined I think it was ruined by the fact it was an 11 a.m. game. It was after Ole Miss. So it wasn't that, to a lot of people, wasn't that big of a game. But if that game was played at night, that would have been, you would look back at that game and be like, oh, that was his Heisman moment because he played with broken ribs. But also having a guy like J.J. Chester who could come in, settle all the issues with the offensive line early, because once you lose your center, you lose the quarterback of your offensive line. Right. For him to come in, settle in, snap the ball perfectly, didn't know his assignments, and also accomplish those assignments that were given to him, ultimately led to LSU coming back and winning that game. And I guess you could say upsetting Missouri. Because even though it looks like on paper that Missouri was a higher ranked team than LSU, also it's just the brand, the fact like LSU was underdog to Mizzou. But that shows you how good that Mizzou team was last year. They won the Fiesta Bowl. Yeah, the Fiesta Bowl. So that was a pretty big moment for DJ Chester. And speaking of stepping in into some pretty big shoes, and it's been, a lot of the receivers. Of course, you lose Brian Thomas, you lose Malik Neighbors. Both those guys are expected to be in the top 10. I think they're like top 10 picks. Brian Thomas could easily sneak his way in the top 10. So, but speaking of the receivers, Kyron Lacey has looked like the star of the receiver room so far in spring. He looked like that last season, last spring, and then as the season went on, once we got into the regular season, he struggled early. He was battling with some inconsistency, dropping a lot of balls he probably should have caught. But then as the season went on, he settled down and became a solid receiver for LSU and looked like he was given the next guy for this offense. But he's looked really impressive this spring. Seems like he's the leader of this group. But then you also have Chris Hilton. And when Chris Hilton's healthy, he's one of the best receivers in the SEC. But unfortunately, he hasn't. So you're getting him back. But then also you had a rotation of Aaron Anderson, who also dealt with some inconsistency last year.
Yeah.
And then Kyle Parker, who looked really impressive last fall when he came in. And then now is having that continuation coming into spring, and he's gotten a lot of first-team reps. So what have you liked about this receiving room so far? And who's really shocked you outside of Kyle Parker? I think that's not really a shock to anybody because we saw him how he performed last fall. But who's been your biggest shocker in terms of the receiver room?
Well, I mean, the one thing that stands out about this group is you got options. I mean, Brian Kelly told us you got there's 7 guys that he could go and trust in this receiving rotation. And when he talked about Kyron Lacy and like he's making those plays we saw, if you can recall, in the fall when Malik Neighbors just like every day at practice, he made one circus catch every day at practice. We were there. That's what Kyron's been doing this spring. So that's what you really like to see. And he seemed like he's really mentally, he's at a good space, I feel like, too. And then I think he's just at an all-time confidence high after talking with him. So he's at a position where he could be a wide receiver one. Like you said, the talent's always been there. It's just a bit about the consistency that he's been able to show. I think he's been showing that in the spring. But yeah, I'm really like the quarterback, like the backup quarterback position. I'm really intrigued to see who separates themselves as that third option. Because, like you said, it's been kind of a carousel. We've seen Aaron Anderson right there. We've seen Kyle Parker, C.J. Daniels. C.J. Daniels is a guy I really like. I mean, big, physical receiver. He's had success at Liberty, where they made the Fiesta Bowl as well. Had over 1,000 yards receiving. So that's a guy that's big, physical. Long, just looks the part. Has made a lot of really good plays. So I've been impressed by CJ. Xavier Thomas is kind of like a guy like Aaron Anderson. You know, you can just get the ball in open space and try to let him go, run after the catch. He could be that type of guy. But the coach has been raving about Shelton Sampson coming up. I mean, I know that Joe Sloan, like, he didn't leave the press conference without mentioning Shelton Sampson and how much he's grown. So the options are there, and I really think that, I mean, like Nussmeier, I mean, you know who your 2 top options are. You know Kyron Lacy, Chris Hill, and those guys. But I'm intrigued to see who kind of separates themselves from the pack because you've got options there. It's just who's going to establish themselves as those options.
Yeah, and just what I had a little omission from earlier, or error, I guess you could say. I mentioned that Mizzou won the
Cotton Bowl, right?
Actually, the Cotton Bowl, right?
Cotton Bowl.
And I'm glad, that came up in mind. It's like, oh yeah, Liberty. It was Liberty, Oregon, and the Fiesta. Oregon ended up winning. The Mizzou beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. But I'm glad you mentioned that. So because I remember, oh yeah, I need to fix that. But anyway, going off of C.J. Daniels. C.J. Daniels was also a guy who had over 1,000 yards receiving for Liberty last year. And Liberty's not a passing offense. They're a run-first option. I believe they had like 2 or 3 like 1,000-yard rushes on their offense. So, I mean, they're a run-first offense through. But C.J. Daniels had 1,000 yards. I think 1,000 he had 1,000 yards receiving. I think it was like top 10 in like yards per catch. And, he was a really good player for Liberty. However, he stepped in this receiver room that's already just as good or better than – you can say better than he is, right? And that just shows you how talented the receiver room at LSU is year in and year out. You can make a case that not only does LSU have DBU, but they could also be wide receiver U. I mean, up there, probably you say Ohio State. So, LSU year in year out, they're going to produce guys who are considered either All-Americans or first-round draft picks. Just because it's LSU, the state just breeds receivers like nothing. And I also can tell you this about this receiver room. Like I know Xavier Thomas is another guy who's coming in. He might be the punt returner for LSU, or either him or Aaron Anderson will be the punt returner for LSU. And I think he will also have get some reps as part of the first team come the fall because he was the leading receiver for Mississippi State last year. Like he was a really good player for Mississippi State,
right?
Despite all their offensive woes. And you want to know how bad that Mississippi State offense was? They looked horrendous against LSU's defense.
Yeah,
it was even more horrendous. So,
Right. And it was early in the season, so you thought, man, maybe LSU turned the corner. No.
Yeah, nope.
Nope. Not exactly.
Yeah, which led to the whole coaching staff getting fired. Like head coach got fired, everyone got fired after 1 year. Even though they finished 5-7, they got fired because the offense was so horrendous, and they're also coming off of the Mike Leach era too. So big shoes to fill. But anyway, going back to LSU to show how tough it is to get reps in this receiver room at LSU.
Yeah.
Sheldon Sampson was a 5-star prospect. He was, I think he was either the second or third best prospect coming to the state of Louisiana at Catholic High. He started since his freshman year at Catholic High. He's part of the third team group at LSU.
Yeah.
Jalen Brown is part of the same class that with Sheldon Sampson. He was a 5-star guy out of the Miami area. He transferred out. He went back to Florida State. Now, he went to Florida State where I think he might actually get a lot of playing time, but that just shows you how tough it is to be receiving this room that's full of talent. But also, I just want to mention this too. Like, what do you hope to see from this receiver room come the spring game? Because we already know about Kyron. But I'm not even just receiver. How about the tight ends? What do you hope to get to see from the tight ends, but also maybe a guy from the receiver room as well that you hope will step up in the spring game that we really didn't get a chance to see during practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's good about the options, right? Because if you you know what you got in Kyron, right? You know what you got in Chris Hilton. But hey, if a third receiver doesn't emerge or guys don't emerge, you can go to the tight ends. And Brian Kelly, you know that this was going to be a position when he got the job at LSU that he was going to build. And now you're at a position where you can go run 12 personnel. You can run 2 tight ends. And really the coaches have been raving about really centralizing the offense around Mason Taylor. And they've been really talking about that. So I'm really interested to see how much they want to involve Mason Taylor. I mean, we saw the breakout freshman year he had when he came in here, and then a little bit of a sophomore slump. I think a lot of it had to do with injuries last year. But I think he's back to where he was like his old freshman self, and have him involved and him being a good safety outlet too. Also, I mean, for Garrett Nussmeier was a young quarterback's best friend, the running game and your safety outlet, your tight end. So I think they're going to really utilize the offense and move it around the tight ends too, and feature like him. And then you could really use the tight ends in multiple different ways, right? Because you got Mac Markway, and you got Kamorian Pimpton, who's kind of like a big Jimmy Graham. I mean, that's what he really is, a big receiving tight end. And you get Trey-Des Green in the fall with that, who's arguably the biggest, I guess, besides Arik Gilbert, he's probably the biggest tight end recruit LSU's ever had. So, yeah, I mean, you got options there at the tight end room, and then you try and run 12 personnel. I mean, that's what you want to do, run those guys. So you got a lot of different options there at the tight end room. And I think that's what's going to really help the offense. And you can tell they're trying to really utilize the tight ends and involve the offense around them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't believe you brought up Arik Gilbert. Now every single Babe Store guy, we're just going to make sure they're extra locked up.
Yeah, that's why I was hesitant to mention his name. But, I mean, he was a highly recruited player for LSU.
Yeah. I mean, Arik Gilbert, that's probably, in my opinion, that is probably the biggest disappointment in terms of just all the hype that a player could bring in, probably since Cecil Collins. I mean, it's very similar to how. Well, now Cecil actually played. Well, no, they actually both played. Screw it. No, screw it. I forgot. Arik Gilbert actually probably outside of
had a good game against Missouri.
Not Missouri. Who was the other receiver that got drafted by the Panthers?
Terrace Marshall.
Terrace Marshall. Yeah, you had Terrace Marshall going off, and then you had Trey-Des Green. Keyshawn Butte wasn't even in the discussion. It was literally those two, and they were mossing everybody. And then all of a sudden, Arik Gilbert just disappeared. We never saw this dude again. Cecil Collins broke his leg, and then had a lot of issues after that. Because he was away from campus and that's what happens with a lot of players. They once they're not involved with the football program, but they leave campus, they get in trouble. And that Cesar Collins was one of those victims. I guess that's what you could call him. But Reed Gilbert, man, that's just like
That's the name, huh?
here's the thing. He is by far a lot of people like this is not even an opinion. This is a fact. He is the highest rated tight end in the history of like recruiting rankings.
Yep.
And he looked like he looked the part. He looked like
he played.
This is our Kyle Pitts, and then just disappeared
out
at the face of the earth. Like it's just that sucks. I hope he gets his love.
Yeah, I hope he gets better.
Yeah. Right, but of course you have to bring up Eric Gilbert, and that distracts us. But let's move it shortly. Let's actually move into the special teams, right? I know nobody was really talked about the special teams, but there is a punting battle going on, right? You replaced Jay Bramlett, who has been the punter for LSU the last few years. He was a very solid punter for LSU, and also Brian Kelly was very comfortable with them because he also punted for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. So he's been a guy that's been a part of a fixture that's been a part of Brian Kelly's program at both Notre Dame and LSU. And I did replace him. You have Peyton Todd, who was one of the highest rated punters in the country, I think in the class of 2021. But he's a redshirt junior and really hasn't got any game experience. But he's a 6'5", 230. He actually played linebacker when he was at Westboro High School in Northern Louisiana, but he really hasn't gotten any reps, like live game reps as a punter. But then you also have a guy, I'm trying to find it, like what was his name? Badger Hargett. So Badger Hargett is another guy. And Badger Hargett is the exact opposite of him. Yeah. Badger Hargett was like 5'8", 193. Like he's not a very big guy. Usually punters are pretty big people, but he's not. He's actually a Lafayette native, went to Ascension Episcopal.
Yeah.
And I believe he was a walk-on, actually. He walked on the program, but they have a pretty big battle going on actually right now. So, is that something we need to watch out for in the spring game, Jace?
I think so. I mean, just like as a side note, and then I think Jacques Doucet asked Brian, like, what about a kicker question? I was like, all right, I'll take a quicker question because it's something we haven't really we paid too much attention to. And I think the only times where we actually seen the kickers and punters really work is when we had full access to practice.
Right.
So we haven't really seen too much of those guys. But, I mean, Peyton Todd's a guy you just kind of just waiting on, right? Just waiting on just to take that job. But the thing about Badger, he comes from a program that's really been known for having a lot of really good kickers and punters really go through that program in Lafayette. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be about keep in mind. I know he's little, but, I mean, we saw him boot a couple of them. He's got a can of a leg. So that's going to be about to really look at. And we'll see who's been more consistent because, I mean, Peyton Todd, I mean, it's consistency, right? We've seen times in the last couple of years he booms one 50, 60 yards, and the next punt he shanks one for about 17, 20. So it's just about being consistent and to see if Peyton Todd can step up in that role because if it's not now, when it's going to be the time for Peyton Todd,
Yeah, exactly. And, we have to bring up the kickers too because Damian Ramos is the incumbent kicker for the last 2 years, but I mean, the thing is, there's always going to be competition. Of course, you have Aiden Corbello, who we're very familiar with. He was the kicker at Jesuit.
Right.
For anybody who doesn't know, we also cover a lot of high school football in Louisiana.
Yeah, we do.
A lot of recruiting. So a lot of these guys we actually already know, right? So that's why I bring up the high schools because we watched them in high school. But Aiden Corbello was a 4-year starting kicker at Jesuit. His dad actually was a kicker at LSU.
Yeah, John.
John Corbello, who was, I believe, he's a part of the 2001 SEC championship team, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I believe he was
something like that. But so he's LSU royalty. But then you also have Nathan Dybert, right? Nathan Dybert was he's been the kickoff specialist for LSU, but he's competing. You wouldn't suspect that he wants the starting job as the kicker as well. So do you think there might be, even though that Damian Ramos is the incumbent could we see a little bit of a battle going on in the spring game that could lead into the fall?
I don't see why not. I feel like Damon Ramos the last couple of years, he's somebody else who's been trying to push away from him, but he's just been consistent. You can't. I mean, he's just been good. He's been consistent. So I think that competition is like, hey, might as well just stick with it, right? I mean, that competition has kind of pushed him to where he is. So you want your guy to continue to be hungry and be able to be on top of his game. So it's good to get that competition in there. But when Jock asked about the kickers, Brian Kelly responds like, well, he's been nailing them. I mean, like Damon Ramos has been. So he's been pretty consistent with all his field goals. I mean, he's 78% range right now, and that's kind of where you want to be. So it's going to be a fun competition. I'm sure they'll have a fun kicking competition in the Tiger Stadium on Saturday. But, yeah, I mean, competition is going to, make or break you. So it's definitely made Ramos so far. So, hey, might as well keep on that trend, keep them working, keep them hungry. So I hope there is competition.
Yeah, man. And, who loves a good kicking battle? I know, of course, people don't really pay attention to special teams because it's not that important. But I think we should talk about it because special teams has been kind of the talk of LSU football the last 2 years. Now, last year improved.
Yeah.
But the very first game against Florida State, when Aronson muffed the punt, we're like, oh, crap, here we go back to 2021. But that's been a major topic of LSU football. Usually you would think the reason why nobody ever talks about special teams is because special teams is something you shouldn't have to worry about because you got that covered. Right. But now the last 2 years at LSU, now you almost have to talk about it.
And it can cost you more than anything. It really can. Right. We've seen it the last 2 years.
Right, and even you can make a case for the Ole Miss game when Damon Ramos barely missed the field goal. I thought it was good at first. That was a big difference in the game as well. So like those points matter. But I think that's even though we really get to see much of it, you kind of have to assume that there's we know there's a position battle going on at the punter spot, but you could be a battle going on at the kicker spot as well. We just don't even know about it. Because there's always going to be competition in those spots. Nobody's safe.
Right. It's like how hot you are. I mean, there's no position that exemplifies that even more than kicker, right? You could have look at the NFL, right? You could be a multi-time Pro Bowl guy that's had a lot of success. But if you miss 3 or 4 kicks in a row, that could be your job. So, it's about what you've done lately. So we'll see if Damon Ramos, he's had a great career at LSU the last 2 years. Not really a guy a lot people has been really looking to be that kicker option, but he has been, and you got to give him kudos for that, and he has a chance to do it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. There's no such bad thing as competition. Competition's never been a bad thing, right? Because I think the thing about competition is that one, it shows you that nobody's safe. You see that even with Nussmeier, Gary Nussmeier is the incumbent quarterback. He's supposed to win the job. His job isn't really technically safe either. There's nobody's job is safe. You have to show up each and every practice. And
look at Jaden Daniels last year. Everybody, kind of expected Jaden Daniels was a starter, but in his mind, I bet he was like, "Oh, Garrett's on my heels. I got to step up my game." So you want that mentally as a football player, get that competition pushing.
Another perfect example of that was there's 2 good examples. One, the fall camp of 2022. A lot of people were like, okay, is it Miles Brennan or is it Garrett Nussmeier? Jaden Daniels he was the transfer that was brought in that some people expected to be the starter, but a lot of people were like, oh, they're either in camp Miles Brennan or camp Nussmeier. And then Jaden obviously improved over the course of fall camp, and then also and what happened was later in the fall camp, remember, Miles Brennan retired from football. He's like, I'm done. Because he dealt with a lot of injuries, right? So he had the broken arm the year before, and then he also had that really weird abdomen injury that you can actually make a case that it should be named after Miles Brennan because that's how rare it was.
He's probably more bad luck football player in LSU history. Just with his string of injuries when he has had and then Jaden ended up winning the starting job. And remember, Jaden didn't have a great spring game.
I think
Yeah.
some people forget about it. He had a horrible spring game, but then eventually worked on his skills and his crafts, and he won the starting job in the fall. And also another perfect example of that was Walker Howard. When Walker Howard came in, he was the Jesus Christ himself. And when he walked in, a lot of people thought he was going to be the starting guy at LSU, was going to lead LSU back to the glory days. I guess in 2019, I guess you could say, because of his success at St. Thomas More, and then also he's also LSU royalty. His dad was a quarterback at LSU for 3 or 4 years. His mom was a cheerleader at LSU, so like he's LSU all the way through. But then Gary Nussbaum, later in the year, he improved on his accuracy and also cut down on his turnovers a bit to the point where Walker Howard looked at him like, I gotta go somewhere else. This isn't looking too hot for me. So like no spot is safe. No, doesn't matter. You're a 5-star or you're a 0-star. No spot is safe. But before we wrap up the latest episode of the Set Up Podcast, I gotta share you the proof. I've been working at Gridiron. That was actually at this. I think it was the third day of the state championship games. Your second or third. It was.
I think that was the end. If I had, I think that was the end. The last day.
Yeah, and so but that was actually a game where we saw guys like Trades Green played their last football games before they ended up going to college, and that was I had a great time. This is actually my post that said my farewell to Gridiron, but to kind of give you guys proof that I worked at Gridiron. There it is.
There it is.
I worked along with Jace. We actually did the same thing. Shooting a podcast for all you guys.
That's right.
That was a fun time. But before we wrap up, Jace, you have any last words?
Nothing, man. Appreciate you having me on the podcast. Anytime you want me on, man, just feel free to call me or shoot me a text. But looking forward to having more of these together, man. And looking forward to take a little break from spring football and then get ready for the fall.
Well, you have a break. I won't. I got to cover LSU baseball still, and then also spring football's happening, high school football too. So I might see you then as well.
Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna be going spring tours and stuff during the spring when football spring camp opens up for these high school teams. So I'll be making my rounds and trying to keep up and see what some of the prominent high school programs are doing to get ready for the fall.
Yeah, exactly. But also make sure to like this video and subscribe to Ruger Sports Media, and also make sure to follow Ruger Sports Media wherever you have your social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But also do the same for Jace and Gridiron Football. Jace's Twitter, just look up Jace LeJeune. His name is right there. Jace LeJeune. It'll be very easy to find him. Very easy.
Yeah.
But then also make sure to follow whatever Gridiron Football is doing. Yep. Make sure to subscribe to their YouTube channel for all the latest updates for LSU, and then also high school football, not only across the state of Louisiana, but nationwide as well. And then also make sure to follow them on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. They put up a lot of good content, and I was very fortunate to be part of that organization, and did what we did for Louisiana football, and kind of seeing all the I got to meet a lot of great coaches, a lot of great players, and that's how I was able to make my connections along with them. But then also with the man himself, Lee Burkeen of Louisiana Football Magazine.
Yep.
But I had two great resources, and through my experiences with both Louisiana Football Magazine, Gridiron, I was able to be very, very good friends with Jace LeJeune, the man himself.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Host Grant Chachere, Ruger Sports Media, and this is Jace LeJeune of Gridiron Football. We'll see you guys next time, because this will be the first time we'll have him on, and it won't be the last.
I guarantee it.
Yep.